I want to thank you for spending your Friday afternoon with us. We promise it'll be fun as well as informative. We're going to talk a bit about our legislative priority bills. We're going to talk a little bit about legislative process, and we're going to talk about baking cakes. And they all combine. So we're going to be creative about that. And I want to first introduce a good friend and partner of ours, Jennifer Bevan-Dangel. She has been around the legislature for a long time, part of Maryland LCV as well, and comes in from a different organization, but with a lot of experience. So we thought it'd be fun to get her voice on this in this conversation as well. So let me turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Kim. It's a pleasure to be here, a former board member of League of Conservation Voters and the Education Fund. Currently, I serve as the state director for the Humane Society of the United States here in Maryland. So thrilled to be rolling up my sleeves in Annapolis, even virtually, as we've been this year. And always a pleasure to be on an event with Kim, who was my supervisor and mentor in Annapolis when I started on my lobbying journey. So really an honor to be part of the work tonight. And Kristen, you are the third member of this fantastic team.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer and Kim, and welcome to my kitchen. I am so excited to be part of this and to do this fun show. Baking and passing legislation are my two favorite things in the world, and both Jennifer and Kim can attest to this, that I talk about both a lot. So I'm happy to bring you into my kitchen and talk about baking and passing legislation with Kristen's Democracy Kitchen. So here we go.
Welcome to another episode of Kristen's Democracy Kitchen. On this episode, Maryland League of Conservation Voters Political Director Kristen Harbeson goes through the steps on how a Maryland bill becomes law and uses the traditional Battenberg cake as a demonstration.
The General Assembly takes 90 days, which only gives a few short weeks for elected officials to take action on critical bills. Before that, on the 69th day of the 90-day session, is an important milestone in the legislative process called crossover. This is the point where if a bill has gone through one chamber in our legislative body, it has a greater chance of passing out of the legislature entirely. So let's dive in and see how a bill becomes a law just in time for crossover, with a crossover cake. Some folks may call this a Battenberg cake or a checkerboard cake, but I'm calling it a Maryland Day crossover cake, since it looks just a little bit like the Maryland flag. First things first, you need to get all your ingredients and supplies together. Preheat your oven to 350 degrees. That will signal the beginning of Maryland's annual 90-day General Assembly session, from the second Wednesday in January to the second Monday in April. In a large baking bowl, beat together the butter and sugar until light and creamy. Add the eggs and continue to beat with the butter and sugar mix. Then add your dry ingredients, your flours, baking powder, and salt. This is a negotiation part of creating the bill. We meet with stakeholders, a variety of people that would have an interest in the bill's content, and hammer out the details to make sure a lot of folks are okay with the bill and that most demands are met in the initial draft. For example, in this recipe, I use gluten-free flour because the folks I'm making this cake for, or the purpose of the bill, is for folks who are gluten intolerant. And it's important that in any bill negotiation to keep in mind who you're drafting the bill for. We want to bake a bill that everyone can benefit from. Now's the fun part. Put half of your mixture in one bowl and half of it in another bowl. The two bowls are now our House and Senate versions of the same bill. Add almond extract to represent the House bill. The chocolate batter is in the Senate. Two delicious chambers. A bill needs to pass both the House and the Senate to go into law. We are baking a bill today that is being introduced simultaneously in both the House and the Senate. You want to grease your square cake tin and divide in two by placing a thick layer of aluminum foil down the center. Put the almond mixture into one side and the chocolate cake in the other. This is the part of the process, the different committees in the different chambers, and the way the bill is passed out of the legislature. We're calling the aluminum foil Bladen Street in downtown Annapolis, the street that separates the House and Senate office buildings. Bake your cake for 30 minutes or until the cake springs back when pressed lightly. Remove from the oven and leave to cool on a wire rack. Cut each cake the same size and then cut each cake in half lengthwise. For a bill to be fully baked, it often needs to be amended to make it fit, like I'm doing with my House cake and my Senate cake. This is almost the point during the legislative process where we are today, better known as crossover. We have two delicious cakes, cooled and ready to be prepared together, or two partially finished versions of the same bill that now must cross over. We have the House version of the bill and the Senate version of the bill, and the advocates, which are represented by a delicious jam filling. We have a House working with the advocates considering the Senate bill, and the Senate working with the advocates considering the House bill. Before the bill is considered finally passed, though, both sides need to be identical, which sometimes requires further amendments. But we want to make sure we don't cut off more than we absolutely have to. Delicious, delicious amendments. Brush the rolled marzipan with a little jam and wrap it all around the cake, hiding the seam underneath. Trim away any excess. Chill in the refrigerator. This looks delicious. And this is the wait time after the bill has gone through both chambers. It's now cooling and waiting for the governor to sign it into law. When it's done, all the work of the legislators and advocates are hidden inside, just like the cake. Serve and enjoy. And that's it. You've passed a law. Better yet, you have cake to celebrate. As you can see, there are many moving parts in making cake and in passing legislation. It requires people coming together and advocating for what's best for us, our families, and our communities. This is a healthy part of any democracy, and good governance requires all of our participation. I hope you learned a lot about how Maryland passes laws and are encouraged to contact your legislators and elected officials. Maryland LCV has made this easy with our Conservation Voter Report, and you can find out who represents you in Annapolis and how those legislators voted on the environment. As the political voice for the environment, we work at the intersection of climate, equity, and state politics to address the most urgent environmental issues of our time: climate change and environmental justice. To that end, please take action today by contacting your state legislators and be part of protecting our land, air, water, and communities. Thank you. Enjoy the cake.
Thank you, Kristen. That was great. And I understand that cake went to Jennifer's house. Is that right?
We had the good fortune of sampling the trial run of the cake, and then our free-range, cruelty-free chickens provided the eggs that you saw in that video. So that's why they were all such pretty colored eggs from our cruelty-free chickens.
That's great.
True story.
Well, I'm looking forward to trying some cake. But in the meantime here, let's talk a little bit about process. And please submit any questions you have in the chat. We've gotten some in that we'll be responding to here shortly. But to set this up, the legislative process is complicated in many ways and also very straightforward. And there, as Kristen described, there's two chambers, and in each chamber there's committees, and in each committee there's subcommittees. And a bill has to get through all of that. They have to get through the subcommittee, they have to get through the committee, they have to get through the chamber, and then goes to the other side, and the same thing happens again. So at each of those steps, a bill can be killed or can not advance is really what happens there. So it's very difficult to get a bill all the way through the process. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of negotiations and a lot of discussion. Just like making a cake, it takes lots of ingredients and lots of people at the table to really bring it about. But it is a process that in the end, the products are very well thought out, and hopefully there's consensus around them. And obviously there's majority around them. So with that backdrop, let me turn to Jennifer, and why don't you describe for us what your experience has been with the legislative process and where you feel that it's easy to get hung up on advancing bills.
I would say that the hardest thing to do in Annapolis is just to get your bill out of committee. Every bill in Annapolis is guaranteed a hearing. So that you'll get the courtesy of. You'll have the chance to make your case, to argue why the bill is so important, and your opposition, or if you're the opponent, will have the chance to say, no, this bill is a really bad idea. But after that hearing has occurred, there's no legal guarantee that a committee ever has to vote your bill. And you enter this very hard, sort of stressful time where all the energy is focused on making sure that you have the votes in committee, that the committee leadership is willing to sort of take this on, depending how challenging the bill might be, and getting the bill moving after that hearing is certainly, I find, the hardest part of all of this.
So, Kristen, let me turn to you. And sometimes what happens is that the House and the Senate a bill may move through the process, but they might end up with different bills. The Senate bill looks different than the House bill, even though they came from the original same structure. So can you discuss what happens then?
Sure. So the House and the Senate are considering the bills independently. They don't really talk to each other in the process. So what is important in some committees, the way the conversation goes in some committees, in say in the House, is going to be different than the conversation that's happening and the things that they're concerned about in the Senate. So they're going to be amending the bill differently if they're going to be amending it. So you're going to have, not unlike the cake, you saw the cake, like they rise differently. They're going to be different shapes. They're going to be slightly different sizes. But what we need to do then is after crossover, so when the House considers the Senate bill and the Senate considers the House bill, what they're trying to do is make them identical. So there's negotiation about what amendments from each chamber the other chamber is going to take. Does the Senate accept the amendments that the House made? Does the House accept the amendments the Senate made? And what you want to do is have the bill as intact as it possibly can be, with only the necessary amendments and only the amendments that the advocates want. And that's really the trick, is to make sure that you get identical bills with as few pieces cut off as you need.
And one thing that I hear a lot from the individuals I work with, and even I get hung up on this sometimes myself, say the bill wasn't amended. So you have House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 1, and they've each moved through their own chamber. The level of frustration and confusion, why do we now need to do this all over again on the other side, is so palpable, especially this time of year. We've got 2 weeks to do all the work that it took us, several weeks to get to at this point. But it's so important to remember that just because your House bill has moved and the Senate bill has moved through the Senate, one of those bills now must cross over to make that beautiful cake and move through the other side. So at least one of the bills has to move through both chambers. It's not enough to get one through each, because then you'd have half a cake. But that's certainly, we hit after crossover, and you do sort of feel like you're starting in all over again.
Right. And based on some experience I've had is, as an advocate, you have a different strategy for each chamber, right? Mm-hmm. So what you do in the House may be different than what you do in the Senate. So Jennifer, what has been the, maybe turn to the priority bills that you guys are working on and how you approach them differently in each chamber?
Certainly. So we came into this session with what we were calling the unfinished agenda for animals. These were primarily 3 bills that had a lot of momentum in 2020. We all know COVID, we're right around the year anniversary of COVID-19 erupting in our lives. And so the session ended early and our bills did not make it through. So we were very determined to see these bills through to the finish line this year. That includes a ban on wildlife killing contests, ending cosmetic testing on animals, and requiring shelter for dogs that are left unattended in extreme weather. Think of the snow we had this February. But it's been very interesting to see how those bills can be very differently received in each chamber. The cosmetics bill moved through the Senate, 47-0, no debate, no questions at all, but then was really stuck in subcommittee in the House for quite some time, as several legislators were raising questions and not sure about how the bill would work or how it would be implemented. So we found that the role for us on the Senate side was just to say, let's go, like we're just the cheerleaders. You've done this before, let's do it again, you're the best. And then on the House side, our role was really that research, fact-finding, providing information. I now know the difference between how the FDA classifies a cosmetic versus a drug, and that anti-aging cream is technically a drug. So you learn a lot in this process too, sometimes along with the legislators themselves. But it definitely depends. Every committee has a different feel. And it's a good reminder, just because your bill sailed through one chamber does not mean you'll have the same experience on the other side.
I think it's important to remember that when you're talking about legislators, you're talking about people. And they're different people with different priorities coming from different districts. And so it's about, if you can have the same ingredients, you can have the same food at one party that you have in a second party, but they're different people. So the parties are going to be very different.
So some people may not like cake and other
Some
people might.
Some people may not like cake. I don't understand those people, but I understand that they have different priorities.
And we had a question come in, so I'm just going to break this down to be super clear because it does get confusing. A bill, if you just let's deal with House Bill 5, and it gets introduced in the House, and it needs to go to the subcommittee, then the committee, and then the whole House votes on it. And then it goes over to the Senate side, and the Senate goes to subcommittee, then to full committee, and then to the full Senate. And all 6 legs of that have to say, yes, we're going to advance this bill through. If the same bill, HB 5, is introduced in the House side, Senate Bill 5, same thing. Now each bill has to still go through 6 legs of it. So it's a long process. If in the end you end up with a Senate Bill 5 that's gone through all 6, and HB 5, which has gone through all 6, and they're different, it'll go to a committee with representatives from the House and the Senate, and they resolve the differences. So there's more chances to kill and stop a bill than there are to pass it. That's for sure. Let me, following up on what you said, Kristen, I wanted to follow up on the fact that legislators are people and they have constituents and they're representing different viewpoints and different needs for their areas. One of the things, though, that I've learned as well when we have a bill we want to push is the importance of picking the right sponsor for your bill. So can you talk a little bit about what kind of considerations we go under for when we pick a sponsor, and maybe describe what a sponsor is first?
Sure. Well, so the very simplest thing, the sponsor is the person who is responsible for introducing the bill. No matter how much Maryland LCV or Humane Society wants something to pass, we have no power as individuals or organizations to introduce bills. We can only reach out to a legislator who is the person who can actually say, this is a bill that I am going to introduce. And that's the person who is going to be, we say, carrying the bill. They are representing this bill. This is their bill to walk through. They are the ones who get the credit when the bill passes. So we choose, so when we have an opportunity, sometimes legislators come to us and say, this is a bill we want to do. Will you work with us on it? But when we're choosing the legislators, when it's something that we're bringing to the General Assembly, we want to look at who we think will be the best person to represent the bill, to represent our interests carrying it forth. It might be a matter of finding somebody who is from a jurisdiction that is where it's most impactful. We might look at whether that person is on the right committee or subcommittee, because that person then will be literally in the room when it's happening. So if you have somebody for HB5, so we're going to say HB5, which is, to be clear, HB5 is not one of the bills that we're working for. I'm not sure what HB5 is this year, but whatever that bill number is if they are on that subcommittee and committee, they're in the room and can help to negotiate how it goes.
Right. So depending on the topic of the bill, it'll go to a different committee. You know, a tax bill will go to Ways and Means, and a health bill will go to Health and Government Affairs, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to pick sponsors that are going to be able to really shepherd the bill through through the committees. just to make sure everybody, all our viewers know, we will be posting the recipe for the cake on our website. If it's not up, it'll be up shortly. So please go ahead and make those cakes and send us your pictures. We want your crossover cake pictures.
Yes.
So, very, very excited to share that recipe as well. Wanted to turn a little bit to Maryland LCV's priority bills, and we have three, well, 3.5, because one is embedded in the other. But I'm going to talk briefly about the climate bill, and I'll turn the rest over to Kristen. Maryland League of Conservation Voters has been behind a bill called Climate Solutions Now Act. And the bill is a comprehensive bill addressing climate change. It sets a new emission reduction goal. So it sets a goal for how many greenhouse gas emissions we want to reduce and by when. And we've gotten the question a lot about that goal. Sounds very ambitious and it sounds pretty aggressive. And are you sure we're going to be able to get there? And our answer is it needs to be aggressive and it needs to be ambitious, and we do need to get there. So we're really proud that that goal is going to help drive technology and new technologies and new approaches, and it's going to really help drive action. So those goals are important. The bill also includes some key specific actions that are going to be important to getting those greenhouse gas reductions. So things pertaining to the building sector and things pertaining to the transportation sector, which are both big contributors to greenhouse gases. The other thing the bill does, though, is to really start addressing the environmental injustices that have occurred in Maryland and around the country, but we're dealing with those in Maryland, and we're trying to strengthen some of the provisions that are part of the Commission on Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities. There's a tax credit for putting solar on rooftops in low to moderate income neighborhoods that we're very supportive. So really helping those impacted communities is part of this bill too, and we feel that's an important part of the agenda. So this bill was passed on the Senate side, so it made it through the subcommittee, and then it went to the Environment Committee, and just last week was passed by the entire Senate. There had been some amendments to it that actually are good. We're supportive of these amendments. Now that bill has gone over to the House and is getting considered at the subcommittee level right now. We do need our House members to know how important this bill is. And so if you go to our website, we will there'll be actions that you can take. We'll also be sending you an action alert so you can notify your legislators that this bill is really important. The other part of this that you need to do, though, is to send a quick note, quick email to your senator thanking them. You know, the Senate did pass it, and we want to say thank you to the Senate for that. So that bill is a top priority for us. And Kristen, do you want to talk about the transit bill?
Sure. So just to go to add into what you said about the Climate Solutions Bill and the question about sponsorship and how we choose sponsors, that was one of the exciting bills where the sponsors of the bill, Chairman Pinsky and Vice Chairman Stein, said, we want to do something big. At the same time that the advocacy community was saying, we want to do something big. So this was really a synergistic, like we're all moving together. So this was us finding them and them finding us all at one time and pulling together something really big and exciting. One of the other big bills that we're working on is the Transit Safety Investment Act, which makes sure that Maryland's public transportation system is adequately funded for 6 years, but year 2023 and 2028. And that is because our system has been drastically underfunded and so has experienced a lot of breakdowns. This is a way to help fix that, to move us to a place where people can rely on public transportation. We're really excited about that because just today, actually, the Senate Budget and Tax Committee passed that bill out unanimously, which includes members from Baltimore City, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Eastern Shore, and Western Maryland. So it shows that it's incredibly important across the state to have well-funded public transit. It also has already passed the House of Delegates all the way through. So in both these cases, we say that the bill has made crossover because it has passed through one chamber before that crossover date, which this year is on Monday, the 22nd. And the third bill actually that we're working on is one that is similar to what Kim was talking about with the Environmental Justice Commission. There is a commission that is meant to help address environmental justice concerns of overburdened communities all across Maryland. Over the last however many years, we found that it doesn't actually have the power that it needs to have to fundamentally address those concerns. And this is something that a lot of people have understood. And so there's a lot of effort, a lot of interest in making sure that that commission works better. So one of the things we're working on is a bill to give that commission the ability to really do good work.
It's great. Good. So we've been describing these bills that we've been advocating for and we've been pushing forward. And obviously we need your help. So definitely take some action on that. The other part of legislation, though, is stopping the bad bills, right? The bills that we do not want to go forward. So Jennifer, maybe you can share a little bit about that process and how, we call it killing a bill, but how we stop a bad bill from moving forward.
Absolutely. And while we've been so thrilled to see our priority bills moving, some of them well in advance of crossover, a lot of our time this session has been fending off bad ideas. Sometimes bad bills are really well intentioned, but cannot be implemented. We had a delegate who introduced a bill this year that would have put expectations and regulatory burdens on our shelter and rescue partners. They were all very well intentioned. The goal is to save lives, and everyone wants to do that. But unfortunately, the way the bill was drafted and the requirements it put in place, our shelter partners couldn't do them. Lives would have actually been lost in our shelters. Animals wouldn't have been able to be saved because they would have been struggling to meet these new requirements. There's a case where we were able to meet with a sponsor, explain the technical concerns, and he very graciously withdrew the bill, for which we're so grateful that he understood that this had unintended consequences. Sometimes we're not so lucky, and sometimes the bills really come from a dangerous place. There's been an effort this year to commercialize deer hunting, to pay hunters to go out and shoot deer. And while the HSUS typically does not engage in hunting bills, we take a position on sort of the worst practices. Putting out bounties for shooting deer is among those worst practices. That's an effort where we fought it tooth and nail in the House and the Senate, and we're very proud that the bill ended up being withdrawn. There will be a summer study, which can sometimes be very scary, as Kristen knows, about how to manage our deer populations more effectively, which we understand is a concern for our farmers and others. But luckily, that idea did not move this session. We don't always win. Sometimes the best we can do is amend a bill. So there was also a bill introduced this year that would have legalized snare traps in Cecil County and decriminalized the possession of snare traps in 6 other counties, including Anne Arundel, Prince George's, Baltimore, Montgomery, and Hartford. That bill poses significant danger, not only to wildlife, but also to companion animals and even small children who can get caught up in these snares. These are silent killers. We don't want these in our backyards and near our public lands. We stalled up bills for as long as we could, and talk about crossover. Our hope was we could just keep the bill from moving until after crossover. Unfortunately, we weren't 100% successful. The bill was amended, so it only applies to Cecil County. But now that it's in that form, it did move forward in the House. So we're still going to do our best in the Senate. But it's interesting how we had our hearings really early on our priorities. We had so much great success. And then we turn around and it was like, oh, we've got a lot more work to do. So there's never a dull moment.
Yeah. I just got a question from a dear friend of mine, Dolores, and who was asking about what it's like to be involved in the session during COVID and how lobbying occurs virtually and not being able to have face-to-face time. So I'm going to let each of us kind of speak to that. I know for me, it has been difficult. There's so much about communication that is much more effective in person. Having said that, I've learned a good lesson, which is that this this way has been so much more accessible for just the regular person who's not a full-time lobbyist or able to get to Annapolis. They don't have to give up an entire workday to attend a hearing. So I think there's some lessons to be learned about access to the process through this. And while I've enjoyed testifying every time in my slippers, I have missed, and I think it has hurt us to not be able to have the face-to-face time. So Dolores, thank you for that great question. And Kristen, what would you say?
Well, I would agree with what you said in terms of access, especially one of the things we're talking about is public transportation. And if Annapolis is wildly difficult to get to by public transportation for most of the places in the state, especially Baltimore City, that people don't, it's hard to get there. So it would have been hard for many of the people who testified on the bill to drive or to take public transit to Annapolis, to wait for several hours to maybe testify for 2 minutes. So that was a huge benefit. There's a lot more that is accessible on the website. They've been much more transparent about what's happening, and things are voting sessions and committees discussions are videotaped and accessible on the website. So that's terrific. But from the perspective of somebody who is a day-to-day lobbyist in Annapolis, a lot of our conversations and a lot of the work that is done happens in those 3-minute conversations in the hallway. And one of the things that has been the hardest. So when we're looking at, say again, in a committee, we're like, okay, how many people do we have who we know are going to be voting for this bill? In normal times, we could just see them in the hallway and say, hey, you're good on this bill, right? And they'd be like, yes or no. And then we say, we'll talk, right? We can't have that. We're having to set up conversations on purpose over meetings to get conversations. And hopefully maybe we have a way to get to them on their cell phone if we have that contact. So, but it makes that part of it much, much harder. I think everybody misses the human contact.
Yeah.
And the energy that comes from all being together.
Yeah.
And
Jennifer?
nuance. I think you sort of touched on this, Kristen, and I agree with what everyone said about virtual access. We were able to have a very successful week of action, which I wasn't sure how that would go virtually, but we had first-time participants who said they would never have come to Annapolis, but the fact they could join a Zoom, it was less intimidating than being in person with their legislator, and certainly more accessible. So there are benefits, but a great example is our shelter for dogs left unattended in extreme weather. That bill's been sort of languishing in the Senate committee, and there's a million reasons that could be happening. They might actually hate the bill. They might legitimately not have been able to get to it yet because they moved a lot of big packages and voting sessions are moving slowly. They might be mad at someone who said something about somebody else, and so they just don't want to vote the bill. And if you're in Annapolis, you can untangle those threads, and it makes it a lot easier to have conversations and try to decipher what's the real problem here. Is it one person I need to speak to? Is it an amendment we really should draft and have ready? Do we, is it just the chairman's not convinced we have our vote count? And that nuance, those flavorings that you would add to your cake, Kristen, those really get lost, certainly via text message and even over the phone in phone conversations. So I have found that incredibly challenging this year.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. And I wanted to drop back again and talk a little bit of, dive deeper into this process, because we talked about how it goes to the subcommittee, the committee, then the full House, and vice versa in the Senate. So what happens at each of those steps is that when a bill's introduced, there's a hearing, and people can testify. That's what we're talking about. So we might sign up in support or in opposition of a bill. We might suggest some changes to it, but citizens that care about this issue, voters that care about this issue can also weigh in. And this is where you can sign up and say, I want to talk to my legislators, and you actually would speak to a committee and during that hearing. And then that's where you can also submit written testimony that puts out your position as well. So those are ways to directly influence and really convey your thinking. once that hearing is done, the committees then start discussing the bills. And this is where the subcommittee really starts diving in. And then the voting process starts. When the bill comes over to the other chamber, right, we've already taken steps 1, 2, and 3. We're now moving it over. There is a hearing, but often it's abbreviated. It's often much shorter. There may or may not be chances to have input on it. So it's, you want to be sure you're tracking that calendar and make sure you've got it. Okay, so Kristen, here's a question from Carolyn. When you have cross-filed bills, do either of them have to cross over by the crossover date? So is there a limitation on timing for it?
So, so let's say that there is House Bill 123, and again, just numbers randomly. I don't know what House Bill 123 is this year, but so House Bill 123 and House Bill 456 are cross files. Only one of them has to make crossover for it to be considered, for it to be on track. You don't actually have to get both House Bill and Senate Bill to cross over in that time, in that first 69 days. You also don't actually have to have a bill cross-filed, and cross-filed means like what we were saying, when we're baking the cake, we're baking both sides of the cake at the same time. You don't actually even have to do that. The trick is, though, that if you have 69 days to get to this point, and then you have 21 days to do the rest. So it would be like saying you bake the cake, you bake one cake all the way through and you take the full time. And then the second time you have to bake it faster in a third of the time. So it's, so it becomes much, much harder. You can do it, but it's harder. So that's the question, is the crossover deadline is Monday, the 22nd. You can move things past there. It just makes it harder. You don't have to have cross-file bills. It just makes it harder. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. And Kristen, we've got a question in from Laurel. She's saying that she is married to a chubby guy. And she wants to know if the cake is fattening.
Well, it does have butter. It does have sugar. As I say, your mileage may vary. You can substitute for healthier ingredients. You can substitute, like I use gluten-free flour because one of my good friends who I usually feed cakes to is gluten intolerant. So there are ways you can substitute it to make it healthier.
Okay.
Or make it vegan.
There are ways you can use different kinds of sugars and
okay.
Yeah, you could make it vegan. It will taste different, but that doesn't mean you can't. It doesn't mean that you can't make it. Okay. Experiment. So I would say, see what you can do and tell us how it goes.
Yeah, Laurel and your chubby husband, test it out, and we'll be anxious to hear how that goes. So let me kind of wrap this up here because we're coming on 5 o'clock on a Friday, but I want to hear Kristen and Jennifer, we've got about 2 weeks left, 2 to 3 weeks left here with the session. And what worries you? What kind of things are on your mind for the next couple weeks as we wrap it up?
I'll jump in because it's pivoting off something Kristen said. It's really that countdown clock. You start to feel like that midnight on Sine Die, which this year is April 12th, that's the last day of session. When all is said and done, there's only 2 dates that matter in session: the first day and the last day. Everything else, you can scramble, you can be nimble, you can be creative, and you can make things work. But once you hit midnight on April 12th this year, or the 90th day, anything that has not fully passed is dead until you can try to bring a new bill back in the next session. And I've lost bills in very painful ways. As Kristen, I think, or Kim, you might have mentioned, if the Senate and the House versions of the bill are slightly different, they have to be reconciled. And so you can lose a bill even over a very small difference in language. Our wildlife killing contest ban passed with a $25 fine in the House and a $100 fine in the Senate, if they don't hammer out which of those fines they want to go with, then the bill could die, even though it's passed both chambers and is going to be heard next week and otherwise had incredible momentum. So making sure you've gone through every last box you have to check to final passage by midnight starts to become more and more scary as that April 12th red circle on your calendar gets closer and closer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think all of us have, so it goes to midnight and all of us have been there at 11:58 and 59, hoping they get to your bill and watching, 3 months worth of work go down the tubes because it's midnight and it's over. Kristen, what about you? What are you worried about in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, and it's about coordination. It's about coordination and keeping and communication with the members, with your sponsors who, and if you have to have a sponsor who is fighting to make sure that it makes that priority list in those last 21 days of session between crossover and signing die.
Yeah, man. Yeah, there's a lot still that can go wrong. And every time you feel like, oh, we've got it.
It's very nerve-wracking.
Yeah, very nerve-wracking, but it's important work. And it really is, I want to come full circle with this, that, these bills are important and they drive real change. And as I mentioned in our climate bill, that we're setting an ambitious and aggressive goal, but that's the problem that needs to be solved. So it's very important and we believe in it. We obviously enjoy it. We end up having some fun times making cakes and having silly discussions around it, but it's what we do and what we love to do. And we can't do it without you. There's just no, I know you hear that all the time, but these legislators could sit and listen to us all day long and we don't have anywhere near the impact that a couple phone calls from their constituents do. Seriously, I think, as many as 5, 6, or 7 phone calls on one bill make a difference in somebody's mind. So don't ever believe that just one little call or one letter or email doesn't matter, because it truly does. So I think with that, we're going to wrap it up unless there's anybody else with burning questions. And Jennifer, if you want to say some fond farewells and share your Facebook and website and whatnot.
Yes, and thank you again for the opportunity to participate. Anyone who wants to learn more about the Humane agenda for 2021 or beyond, please make sure to follow us on Facebook. It's at HSUS Maryland. You can also email me. The easiest email is maryland@humanesociety.org. And we can make sure you get on the email list to stay up to date on all of the legislation that we're moving, as well as being part of the work this summer and into 2022, which will be here sooner than we know.
Great. Kristen, for the good of the order, any closing remarks? I guess not.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm always happy to answer any questions that anybody may have. Feel free to, I'm very findable on our website, and I'm delighted to help anybody find their way through the process, because as Kim says, we can't do it without you.
So enjoy your weekend. Go to our website. We need help, and you can find out how to do it there. And also make cakes and send us pictures. We'll be happy to enjoy that with you. So thanks again for joining us. Good night.
Thank you.